Rain-slicked streets glimmered under the dim amber light of Alder Creek, a town that had long forgotten how to trust its own shadows. Detective Lena Hayes tightened the grip on Duke's leash as the K-9's hackles rose. Every muscle in his body taut, his gaze locked on the old mirror room at the edge of the abandoned mansion, a place locals whispered about but never dared enter. The moment Duke froze, time seemed to bend and a chill crawled up Lena's spine. What her eyes saw was one thing, but the footage from the cameras, replayed later, was something entirely different, something that didn't make sense. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still slick and reflective, like a fractured glass version of Alder Creek itself. Lena Hayes parked her unmarked car beside the overgrown drive of the old Carmichael estate. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, a rotting monument to the family that had vanished without explanation, leaving only rumors and cold draft behind. She didn't care about the history. All she cared about was Duke. The K-9 who'd been with her through thin walls of doubt, missing persons, and long nights when the town's secrets pressed against her like a wet sheet. Duke's ears twitched, tail low, body rigid. He sniffed the air, then froze entirely, eyes locked on the mansion's side wing. The windows that were caked with grime, and the faint outline of broken mirrors shimmered behind them. "Easy, boy," Lena whispered, but her voice trembled more than she expected. Duke did not move. He growled low, the kind of growl that wasn't provoked by anything natural, by no scent, no shadow. It was a warning, primal and uneasy. She stepped out of the car, boots sinking slightly into the mud. The air smelled like wet leaves and decay, and the faint metallic tang of old blood, or maybe rust, made her stomach tighten. Cameras had picked up unusual energy in the mansion last week. Not paranormal exactly, but inexplicable. Static-filled footage, voices in the empty halls, lights flickering when no one was there. Lena didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in patterns. And patterns, she knew, didn't lie. Duke whimpered once, a small, tight sound, and pressed himself closer to her leg. Lena knelt down and stroked his neck. "Okay, buddy, we'll just look, then we go." She wasn't entirely sure who she was trying to convince, him or herself. The mansion's front doors groaned in protest as she pushed them open. Water had seeped through cracks in the roof, leaving puddles and mud in the grand foyer. A chandelier hung precariously, crystals coated in dust. The air was heavy, each breath tasting faintly of iron. Somewhere in the distance, the town's lights flickered, swallowed by clouds. She moved cautiously, Duke at her heels. The side wing loomed ahead, doors cracked and warped. It was here that the mirror room was supposed to be, according to the security footage she'd reviewed. Windows covered in grime distorted the shapes inside. The mirrors themselves, shattered in some places, made the room seem larger, endless, impossible. Lena's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating splintered floorboards, peeling wallpaper, and occasional graffiti left by thrill-seeking teenagers. She stepped lightly, aware that every creak might announce her presence to something she couldn't see. Duke stopped abruptly in front of a set of double doors, the type that should have been locked decades ago, but were cracked enough to slide open with a push. Lena's heart kicked into overdrive. She remembered what the cameras had shown the previous week. Duke had approached these doors, too, during a routine sweep and froze, just like now. But when the recording was reviewed, the footage made no sense. The K-9's movement seemed delayed, unnatural. For a few heartbeats, Duke's eyes weren't on the door. They were somewhere else. Something else. "All right," Lena whispered, sliding the doors open. The room inside smelled of cold wax and something faintly coppery. Mirrors lined every wall, some cracked, some pristine, all reflecting the light of her flashlight back in a kaleidoscope of sharp angles. The ceiling was low, wooden beams heavy with years of neglect. The floorboards moaned with each step, echoing as if the house itself were breathing. Duke stepped forward, but not willingly. His body was tense, tail tucked, ears back. The moment he crossed the threshold, Lena felt it, a shift subtle but undeniable. The temperature dropped. The shadows elongated unnaturally. Something in the mirror seemed wrong. Then she saw it. The reflection of Duke, frozen mid-step, even though he was moving. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and not entirely his own. Lena's stomach churned. She reached for her phone, hand shaking, and snapped a photo. The reflection didn't match reality. A soft whisper echoed behind her. She spun around. Nothing. Duke growled low, backing up slowly. "It's okay, boy. I'm right here." But even as she spoke, she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Someone or something was in the room, just out of sight. The mirrors warped again, and Lena's pulse spiked. Shapes flickered. Glimpses of figures that weren't there, distorted shadows that moved independently of the light. One mirror, larger than the rest, reflected her and Duke, but also another man, standing behind her, pale, expressionless. She whipped around. Empty air. Her flashlight flickered. A low hum started, rising in pitch. Duke's hackles raised, teeth bared. He barked once, sharp, and then froze. His gaze was fixed on the corner of the room, where a mirror cracked diagonally. Lena looked closer. The cracked glass was perfect in its imperfection. The shard showed Duke the reflection of herself, but also a third shadow crouched just behind them. Lena's breath caught. Her phone slipped from her fingers. A voice, whispering her name, crawled through the room. Not loud, not demanding, just a quiet, knowing murmur that seemed to echo from inside the mirrors themselves. "Lena?" The lights in the room flickered violently. One mirror shattered spontaneously, fragments scattering across the floor with a sound that echoed like screams. Duke bolted, pressing against her side, paw at the floorboards as if trying to dig a hole through reality itself. She grabbed him, pulling him toward the door, but the exit seemed farther. The room stretched in ways that defied logic. What had been a few steps now felt like crossing a canyon. Every mirror reflected not the room she occupied, but a twisted version of it. Hallways extended into infinity, shadows slinking behind them, always just out of reach. Lena's mind raced. She thought of the cameras. If they had recorded this, if she had actually been looking at what Duke had been seeing, it would be impossible to explain. And yet she knew. She was standing in the exact place the footage had frozen Duke last week. Duke whimpered low, almost human, and then barked furiously at one of the mirrors. Lena looked. Her own reflection, eyes wide, frozen in terror, was moving independently, gesturing toward the far wall. Lena stumbled backward. The mirror version of herself raised a hand, pointing at a small hatch in the corner. She hadn't noticed it before. With a trembling hand, Lena approached the hatch. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, incomprehensible but urgent. She lifted the lid. Inside was a small journal, bound in leather, pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it. The first line made her blood run cold. "They see through the glass. They wait, and sometimes they take." Duke barked sharply, snapping her out of her trance. The journal fell from her hands as he bolted again toward the far end of the room. Lena followed. The mirrors seemed to close in around them. Each step was a battle against the invisible current of cold air pressing from all directions. Shadows swirled. Reflections moved in opposition, revealing truths or lies she couldn't yet parse. Then a sound like breaking bones echoed through the room. Lena froze. Duke's bark turned into a whine, and he pressed himself flat against her chest. Her flashlight flickered one last time, illuminating a figure standing inside the largest mirror. Pale, faceless, but unmistakably there. And then, just as suddenly, the room went silent. No mirrors moved. No shadows lingered. Duke was still, eyes calm again, as if nothing had happened. Lena sank to the floor, heart hammering. The journal lay open before her. Her reflection, normal now, stared back without threat, without warning. But the sense of being watched, of something waiting just beyond understanding, lingered in the air like the last breath of a nightmare. Lena picked up Duke's leash. Outside, the rain had returned, tapping softly on the mansion's broken windows. She whispered to him, voice barely audible, "We'll come back. We have to understand." And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the mirror room had only just begun to show them what it wanted. The rain had turned the streets of Alder Creek into rivers of silver under the muted glow of streetlights. Lena drove in silence, Duke rigid in the passenger seat, eyes darting to every shadow that moved along the edges of the road. The mansion receded behind them, but the memory of the mirror room pressed on her mind like a weight she couldn't shake. That journal, with its cryptic warnings, burned against her palms, urging questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She pulled into the lot behind the precinct, rainwater dripping from her hood. Sergeant Ed Callahan was waiting, an unshaven man with eyes that had seen too much, but never quite enough. He wasn't a believer in the supernatural, not in any conventional sense. Yet when she showed him the footage of Duke freezing, his face paled. "You're telling me your K9 just stopped, and the cameras recorded what?" Ed's voice trembled slightly, a mixture of disbelief and fear. "I don't know," Lena admitted, voice tight. "It's like the room shifts. The mirrors reflect something else, something that isn't there. And Duke, he reacts before I even see it." Ed rubbed his temple. "You've been under a lot of stress, Lena. This town eats its own shadow sometimes." "I know what I saw, Ed." She pressed the journal into his hands. "Read it. Just read it." Ed flipped the brittle pages carefully, frowning at each line. The handwriting was jagged, desperate, almost frantic. Words scratched into the leather-bound pages described incidents from decades ago. Disappearances, odd occurrences in the Carmichael mansion, and cryptic warnings about mirrors showing not reality, but what waits behind it. "This is insane," Ed muttered. But there was something in his eyes, a spark of recognition, maybe a memory he'd buried, that betrayed the disbelief he tried to maintain. Lena left the precinct that night without further argument. Duke sat quietly, as if he knew the city streets were no longer safe. The journal burned against her chest as she thought about her next move. She had to go back. She had to understand what the cameras had captured, even if it meant confronting something that made no sense. By morning, she was already at the local library, poring over old newspapers. There were mentions of the Carmichaels, of course, a wealthy family wiped out by tragedy. Their daughter vanished one winter night. Father dead in a hunting accident. Mother disappeared. But scattered among the articles were minor reports, odd incidents at the mansion, strange lights, missing pets, townsfolk claiming to hear whispers behind mirrors. The more she read, the more a pattern emerged. All of it pointed to the mirror room. When she returned home, Duke seemed almost restless, pacing by the window. She made herself a cup of coffee, the journal open on the counter. That's when her phone buzzed. A message from Ed. "Meet me at Carmichael Estate. Now, don't go alone." Her stomach twisted. She knew he wouldn't leave well enough alone, but the message suggested urgency. She grabbed her coat, leash in hand, and headed back into the rain. The mansion loomed, even larger in daylight, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring at her. The air smelled of damp wood and rust. Duke growled low as they approached the side wing. Ed was already there, flashlight in hand, eyes scanning the mirrors like a man bracing for blows. "Lena," he whispered as she joined him. "Something's wrong. I saw something on the cameras again. Footage I didn't review before." He handed her a tablet. The footage showed Duke entering the mirror room last week. He froze as expected. Lena leaned in. The shadows in the footage shifted unnaturally, curling along the edges of the mirrors. Then, in a corner reflection, a figure appeared, tall, faceless, just standing there waiting. Duke barked, but the reflection didn't move. And then, Ed said, voice low, "It blinked. Not Duke. Not you." Something in the mirror blinked on its own. Lena swallowed hard. The room suddenly felt colder. She could see her own reflection in a distant window, faded, almost translucent, and it made her skin crawl. "We need to go in. Now," she said, voice steady more for herself and Ed. Inside, the mirror room felt different from last time. Shadows stretched further, and the light seemed refracted in impossible ways. Lena noticed something she hadn't before. Faint etchings along the frames of the mirrors. Symbols, numbers, and letters scratched as if by fingernails. A subtle pattern, almost like a map. Duke stopped abruptly. His body stiffened. Lena followed his gaze. One mirror, larger than the rest, reflected not the room, but a hallway she had never seen. A hallway lined with doors, each one closed. She approached it slowly. Ed followed, flashlight trembling in his hand. "This is impossible," he muttered. "We're not supposed to see this." The whispers returned, faint, unintelligible, but urgent. Lena felt a tug in her chest, a magnetic pull toward the reflected hallway. And then she saw movement, figures behind the doors, watching, waiting. A sudden realization hit her. The mirrors, they're not reflecting the room. They're reflecting time, or memory, or something in between. Ed's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, she saw a shadowy figure step from one of the mirrored doors into reflection of the room itself. It was humanoid, but distorted, faceless, moving in impossible angles. Duke barked and lunged, but his paws met only cold floorboards. "What is it?" Ed asked, voice strained. "I don't know," Lena admitted, heart hammering. "But it's been waiting, and we're in its sight now." They explored cautiously, tracing the scratch symbols along the frames. Some of the etchings resembled the letters in the journal, connecting present to past. Each mirror seemed like a node, a window into events that had occurred within the mansion over decades. The disappearance of the Carmichael daughter, the missing pets, the whispers in the town, all reflected here. Suddenly, Duke froze again. Lena turned. One of the mirrors, small and cracked, reflected not her and Ed, but a child, sitting on the floor, knees to chest, staring. The child's eyes were hollow, yet unmistakably alive. Lena's stomach dropped. She had read about this girl, the vanished Carmichael daughter. Could it really be her? But the child moved unnaturally, limbs bending in ways that should have been impossible. "Get back," Lena whispered to Ed, but even as she spoke, the mirror rippled like water. The child, her reflection, smiled, though the expression wasn't hers. Teeth too sharp, too white. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket, an unknown number. Hesitating, she answered. A voice, distorted, fragile, and somehow familiar, whispered, "Lena, don't trust him." Ed looked at her. "Who? Me?" She froze. Duke growled, low and deep. Something about Ed's shadow seemed off, not human. Lena's mind raced, remembering the glimpses of the faceless figure, the distortion in the mirrors, and the journal's warnings. Had Ed come here with her own agenda? Or had the mansion claimed him somehow? The whispers escalated into a chorus, overlapping voices that made the air vibrate. Lena felt nausea, vertigo. She backed toward the nearest exit. The mirrors stretched the room, impossible angles twisting reality. Reflections of herself and Ed moved independently, gesturing frantically. Some mirrored versions spoke. Some ran, some vanished entirely. Then came the first real pain. A searing image burned into her mind. A mirrored Ed lifting a knife, reaching toward mirrored Lena. She blinked and the vision vanished. Her chest heaved, Duke trembling at her side. Lena had to make a choice. Stay and risk losing her mind, or retreat, and risk the truth never revealing itself. She gripped Duke's leash, tightened resolve, and pulled Ed toward the door. The mirrors fought them, stretching the room further. A shadow lunged from one cracked frame. Ed stumbled. Lena caught him just in time. Duke barked fiercely, and the shadow recoiled, hissing, before vanishing into fractured glass. Finally, they burst into the daylight. Rain pelted them, washing away the cold, the whispers, the lingering tension. But Lena knew the mirror room hadn't let them leave fully. Something had followed them, or at least remembered them. The journal lay open on the hood of Lena's car, pages fluttering in the wind. The final line she read sent a shiver down her spine. "Trust is a fragile mirror. Break it, and you may never see yourself again." Ed looked at her, pale and shaken. We shouldn't come back, right?" Lena stared at the mansion, looming behind the veil of rain. "No," she said quietly. "Not until we understand what's waiting, and what it wants from us." Duke leaned into her, a single comforting presence amid a storm of uncertainty. Lena's gaze returned to the journal. Somewhere between the scratches and the mirrors, the voices and the reflections, Alder Creek's darkest secrets were waiting, and they were patient. The mansion didn't need to move to terrify them. It was alive in ways neither of them could yet comprehend. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving Alder Creek swaddled in mist that blurred the edges of the town like a painting half forgotten. Lena sat in her car, Duke resting his head on her lap, both of them staring at the Carmichael mansion. It had been 2 days since their last visit to the mirror room, and neither of them had slept properly. The journal lay open on the passenger seat, pages fluttering as if stirred by a breath of wind that wasn't there. Something had changed. The mansion no longer seemed abandoned. From the broken windows, Lena swore she saw a flicker of movement, a shadow lingering in the corner of the mirror room's side wing. She clenched her hands on the steering wheel. Duke growled softly, sensing her unease. Ed had called earlier, voice hesitant, almost conspiratorial. "Lena, I've done some digging. About the Carmichaels, about the journal. You need to know something." They met in a small diner on the edge of town. Steam rose from their coffee cups, mixing with the scent of fried bread and stale sugar. Ed's normally steady eyes were clouded with guilt. "They weren't just a family that disappeared," Ed said quietly. "The Carmichaels, they were experimenting. With mirrors, with perception. They believed that mirrors weren't just reflections. They were doors, not in a metaphorical sense. Literal doors to something else." Lena felt her stomach twist. Something else. Ed swallowed hard. I think whatever's in that room isn't just supernatural. It's intelligent, patient. It learns. It mirrors your trust, your fear, your weaknesses, and it manipulates them." Lena's mind raced back to the whispers, the faceless figures, the mirrored Ed. She realized suddenly, horrifyingly, that the journal hadn't been warning them. It had been a map, and a warning, yes, but also a test. "You knew?" she asked, voice low. Ed looked away, ashamed, partially. I knew more than I should have. My grandfather worked for the Carmichaels. He told me things before he died. I thought it was just local superstition. Lena, I thought I could control it if I watched closely. But I didn't realize." His voice trailed off. Lena felt a chill sweep through her. Duke's growl brought her attention back to the present. Outside the diner window, the mist shifted unnaturally, curling like fingers toward the earth. "We have to go back," Lena said, voice firm. "We can't let it manipulate anyone else or stay here." Ed hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but this time we do it together. No mistakes." The drive back to the mansion was tense, each corner of the fog-laden road revealing only what was necessary to see. Lena's hands were tight on the wheel. Duke, alert as ever, occasionally lifted his nose, sniffing the unnatural air that seemed to cling to the mansion's periphery. Inside, the mirror room was worse than they remembered. The air was thick and cold. Shadows clung to the corners, sliding across the surfaces of the mirrors, elongating, twisting, coiling. Lena felt a sudden, almost electric tug at her chest. The room remembered them, remembered their fear. "Duke," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Stay close. Don't let it pull you in." The whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping, creating a cacophony of voices she couldn't distinguish. Then, in a single mirror, she saw it, the reflection of herself smiling. But it wasn't her. It was older, wiser, but terrifyingly calm, eyes glinting with a knowledge she didn't possess. "Lena," the mirror version said, voice like silk over broken glass. "You've come back, and now you must decide." Ed's voice broke her trance. "Don't engage it." But it was too late. Lena felt the room bending, stretching around her, her reflection reaching through the glass as if tugging at her soul. Duke barked, lunging toward the mirror, but his paws hit nothing. And then Lena noticed something terrifying. The mirrored Ed was still standing behind her reflection, holding the knife she had imagined before. But now it was real, glinting in the distorted light. Lena's heart stopped. "Ed," she whispered. His real self stepped forward. I tried to warn you," he said, voice cracking. "But I don't know if I can stop it. The mirrors, they take pieces of you. Pieces of your trust, your fear, everything." The mirrored versions lunged. Lena screamed, throwing herself to the side as glass exploded around her. Duke yelped, protecting her, snapping at shadows that had no substance. When the shard settled, Lena was alone with the journal, now glowing faintly as if alive. She picked it up, flipping to the last pages. There, a hidden note she hadn't seen before. The one who trusts least is safest. The one who betrays most is consumed. Suddenly, Lena understood. The mirror room didn't just reflect. It judged. It thrived on fractured trust. It had shown her Ed's duplicity, not as a lie, but as a potential fracture to exploit. She turned to see Ed staring at the mirrors, realization dawning. "No! It's going to take me," he whispered. The room's cold air swirled, tugging at him like hands. Shadows elongated, coiling around him, pressing him toward a cracked mirror. "Ed!" Lena lunged, but it was too late. His scream echoed to the mansion as the shadows consumed him, pulling him into the reflection. The mirror shimmered, then settled. No trace remained. Duke barked, pacing beside Lena, who sank to her knees, chest heaving. Her mind reeled. Betrayal, trust, and survival had collided violently in one instant. She had lost Ed, a friend she thought she could trust. But in that room, trust was a weapon and betrayal a door. Time passed in moments, then hours. Lena sat in silence, Duke leaning against her, both of them exhausted and haunted. The mirror room no longer shimmered. The shadows had receded. The whispers had vanished. Finally, she rose, journal clutched tightly. Each page felt heavier, laden with the weight of lessons learned in blood and reflection. She walked slowly toward the exit. The mansion loomed behind her, silent now, but she knew it would wait, always wait. Outside, the morning light was weak, struggling against the mist. Lena paused, looking back. The mansion's windows gleamed faintly, as if acknowledging her survival. Duke nuzzled her hand. She stroked his fur, a gesture of comfort in a world that had proven how fragile trust could be. "You survived," she whispered. "We survived." The mansion was quiet, but Lena knew it wasn't gone. It had only taken what it needed, and she carried the warning, the memory, the weight of betrayal, and the knowledge that some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed. As she drove away, the journal beside her, she felt a quiet resolve. The mirror room had shown her the cost of fractured trust, the danger of curiosity, and the cruelty of something patient enough to manipulate human hearts. But she had survived. Duke beside her, the journal intact. She carried the story forward. Somewhere deep in Alder Creek, the mansion waited, patient and eternal, waiting for the next reflection, the next trust, the next fracture. And Lena knew in her bones that one day it would call again,